Welcome everybody to our first event of the Research and Policy Forum on Climate Change and the Environment at the Issam Institute. This is our first event of the new semester, and hopefully we'll have plenty more. Today we're looking at carbon trading as a climate change mitigation tool. And this talk has been put together in part by the IFI team, but also with the sponsorship of the British Embassy in Beirut, and more actively here at AUB. We've got two clubs that have worked with us, the AUB Democracy and Citizenship Club and the AUB Environment Club. I'd like to recognize their contribution and help in putting this together. Today we are privileged to have Mr. Souheil Abboud, the Middle East Regional Director of Ecosecurities Group, and Dr. Charbel Moussa, the Project Manager at Ecosecurities Group, and they'll be giving us a talk on carbon emissions trading. And at the end of the talk, I would suggest, hold off questions as they go along. It is up to them, basically. But then at the end, it's open floor for discussion and give and take. So it's not a lecture here per se, but a discussion amongst the presenters and the attendees. Please, sir.
Okay. Good afternoon. I'm going to stand up just because I can't sit. My name is Souheil Abboud. I'm the, again, Middle East Regional Director for Ecosecurities. I'm going to contradict Dr. Nadim and say, let's make it very interactive. So if you have any questions that you feel you want to go ahead and ask as we go along, please feel free to do so. We are going to have a Q&A session at the end. We're holding these workshops as part of a British Embassy-sponsored initiatives to raise awareness on mainly three things: climate change, the business that has been developed because of climate change, and basically, the voluntary carbon aspect of it. And for those who are familiar with the topic, bear with us. Some things are going to be fairly basic, and others won't. So if you don't understand the acronyms and the definitions, we'll eventually get to all of them. And again, please feel free to interrupt me if you feel that certain acronyms or terms are not being met. The idea here again is climate change. What is climate change? What comes into mind when we talk about climate change? Obviously, disasters, droughts, decentralization of weather patterns. Today we see climate change is contributing a lot to desertification in certain areas and excessive rains in others. Southeast Asia, Australia are a good example. New Orleans is a very good example of what's happening to climate change, where we're having extreme weather patterns, decentralized weather patterns. For those who are familiar with Southeast Asian weather patterns, normally the monsoon season would sweep the entire region. Now we're seeing a very decentralized weather pattern. Change of sea level, obviously, the ice shelves are melting. This is causing ocean levels to increase, threatening countries like Bangladesh. It's projected what 2/3 of it to disappear if ocean levels continue to increase. What also comes to mind, obviously, is ice meltdowns. For those who have seen the north, specifically north of Canada, would know exactly what I'm talking about with the disappearance of
Banquise.
It's an glacier. All right. So climate change, obviously. Also what comes to mind for the business aspect of it is the industry that's been developed. Today, through the UNFCCC, United Framework for Convention on Climate Change, the ratification of Kyoto Protocol, a huge industry was developed because of that. Companies that develop CDM projects, clean development projects, we'll talk a little bit about it in a minute. The financial institutions that trade the environmental commodities, whether certified emission reduction or verified emission reduction. And to put things in perspective, in 2005, the size of commodity traded among countries and governments and companies was just under 10 billion euros. In 2008, 3 years after that, we exceeded 90 billion euros. If the Americans, with President Obama's commitment to go into phase 2 of the Kyoto Protocol, the size of the industry is projected to increase to around $1.3 trillion. So this is a serious business that have actually contributed to fighting climate change from a business perspective, if I may. So what is climate change? Obviously, as I said, the decentralization of weather patterns, increasing of the Earth's temperature, sea level rising. Scientists firmly believe this is the contribution of it is primarily to our own fault of living and burning fossil fuel, human activities in general. The impact of it is obviously being felt in the north and the south poles, and this is unfortunately where the ice shelves that we have, and this is what's causing the ocean levels to increase. If we track, or scientists have tracked it since the Industrial Revolution, they've built a very close relationship between the amount of carbon dioxide emissions in the atmosphere in relationship to the Earth's temperature increasing by 1 degree since the Industrial Revolution. Obviously, this impacts the ocean levels and impacts the shrinking of the ice caps. Again, we're not here to talk about the science of it as much as to talk about just facts and move into possibly the business aspect of it and what we can do. So the world came together in '97 to deal with climate change, just like what we did in probably the 80s and the 90s when we were fighting acid rain. And the Kyoto Protocol was agreed on, a definition to what needs to be tackled, and that's the greenhouse gases was identified. And these are the 6 gases that were identified as contributors to climate change, global warming, and they're all put in the GWP, global warming potential of carbon dioxide, and the importance of each gas in relationship to carbon dioxide. And there's another graph that we'll talk about to illustrate this point. In a nutshell, what we're saying is CH4, methane, is 21 times more potent than carbon dioxide and more damaging to the atmosphere to illustrate the point here. These, living our daily life, this is what these are the activities that cause the emissions of carbon dioxide. 77% of the greenhouse gases that we contribute is from CO2. Methane, 14%. And N2O is 8%, others are around 1%. So the transportation is around 14%. All the cars, the planes we take contribute to that. The electricity, whether it's residential or for industrial or commercial buildings. But also what we need to bear in mind is the land use changes, which is around 4%. Because the gas that comes out of our landfills is methane, it's not carbon dioxide. And again, methane is 21 times stronger than carbon dioxide. So the fact that it's only 4%, its impact on climate change is actually very large. If you multiply that roughly by 21%, you'll get the idea of what we're talking about. It's an interesting graph because it shows us what the impact is. So it shows us exactly what we're talking about here and the relationship that it does to our climate. What scientists are also saying is if we track it to 4,000 years ago, they've always managed to look at the CO2 particles in the atmosphere and basically be able to predict where the weather is taking us or the climate is taking us. What they're cautioning us is about 2 things. The Earth's temperature increasing above 2 degrees and the CO2 particles increasing about 450 ppm in the atmosphere. Because they believe that if we exceed the 450 ppm, that we are entering a climate that we do not know how to predict, how to model, how to simulate. We are currently at around 380 ppm, and already up by 1 degree since the Industrial Revolution. So basically what we're saying, or what scientists are saying, we still have 1 degree to play with, and around 40 to 50 to 70 ppm of CO2 to play with in order to get our climate into the unknown. It's a serious problem that they're seriously cautioning us to pay a lot of attention to. What they're also saying is, if we continue to live our life as is, without taking any consideration to climate change, we will hit the 450 ppm of CO2 within 10 to 20 years. So basically what they're saying is we're putting our climate into the unknown zone in 10 to 20 years if we don't do anything to combat climate change. If we go back to the emission levels of 1990, we will be putting ourselves in the unknown within 40 to 50 years, plus minus obviously. And if we take serious measures from a government level, business level, and individual level, then we will be able to sustain the CO2 emission levels in our atmosphere for at least the short, medium, possibly long term, at least till 2090. This requires serious commitment from governments. As I said, the Kyoto Protocol was only scratching the surface. The entire world committed to the Kyoto Protocol, with the exception of the US and Turkey. Turkey ratified it very recently, and now with President Obama coming into power, there's a huge commitment from this part to bring in the US into the combating climate change. The Stern report basically says if we take action to deal with climate change, it's going to cost the world around 1% of its GDP. It's a huge number, but it's tiny if we don't do anything, because it's going to cost us 5% of our GDP. Again, to take recent examples of what we're talking about Katrina destroying New Orleans. You can imagine the infrastructure damage that caused the U.S. economy. So it's a lot more economical for us to actually take action, combat climate change, as opposed to doing nothing. The Kyoto Protocol. Briefly to talk about it, why it was developed. It was developed because we had a problem. The problem was climate change, greenhouse gases, climate change, warming of the Earth's temperature, and all the things we talked about. It was agreed on in 1997 by, as I said, mainly the entire world, to combat this serious challenge and be able to sustain a climate that we can predict in the short to medium term. How does it work? I'll get back to this. In a nutshell, what the Kyoto Protocol says is, let's separate the world into two segments, or two annexes to be correct. The developed economies and the emerging economies. The developed economies, with the exception of the US, have a mandate to reduce their emissions below the 1990 level. The emerging economies can voluntarily reduce their emissions, and if they voluntarily reduce their emissions, they can qualify to get a credit, which is referred to as a CER, Certified Emission Reduction, that they can sell to the developed economies in order to meet their targets. We'll explain this a little bit more in the next slide. So what we're saying is, if we build a wind farm project in Lebanon, or a solar panel, or a biomass, or an energy efficiency project, anything that would reduce emissions, anything that has an approved methodology by the United Nations, a company like Ecosecurities can work with the government or project developers in Lebanon in order to get these credits certified and registered with the United Nations. We can sell them to a developed economy, developed country, England, in this case it's the Netherlands, in order to help them meet their target. In return, money flows back into an emerging economy such as Lebanon in order to promote sustainable development, clean energy, and what have you. The process of exchanging commodities and money between an emerging economy and a developed economy is what we call the CDM, the Clean Development Mechanism. So CDM is the process that was set up under the Kyoto Protocol to transfer commodities and money between emerging and developed economies. There are other schemes in place that are primarily focused on developed economies trading among themselves, what we refer to as the JI, Joint Implementation, and the Emission Trading Schemes and Allowances in Europe. So how does this, obviously there's a lot of people that have issues with the Kyoto Protocol. We can discuss them in the Q&A sessions, but the idea here is to raise what the importance and what has Kyoto achieved. Now, if we look at the objectives of the Kyoto Protocol, it's more cost-effective emission reduction. Today, if England cannot reduce its emissions, for some reason, I mean, there are certain levels that the government can do or the private sector can do to reduce emissions, but they have to get to a point where they can't do it anymore because the cost is possibly too high. It's then cheaper to go and promote sustainability, clean energy in a country like Lebanon in order to get these credits and offset their credits. So without the Kyoto Protocol, Lebanon would probably not see a single penny going into clean energy. Again, some people might argue that, but we'll talk about contribution to sustainable development. I'm one of the cynics that basically, if we ask around here, what's the definition of sustainable development, we'll probably get 30 different answers. The Kyoto Protocol left it to governments to determine their own sustainable development criteria. We have people, I think, from the DNA. So the DNA, the designated national authority, will determine what the sustainable development criteria for the Lebanese government is that companies and project developers have to follow in order to get the approval from the Lebanese government and transfer of clean technology. The benefits, let's always not forget that this entire process and system is designed to combat climate change. And the money aspect of it is great for business people, but at the end of the day, we're doing all of this, the world is doing all of this to combat climate change. For emerging economies, it's FDI. For people who love the economy, FDI is very important. It's a way of bringing a lot of money. To put things in perspective, China gets around 1.5 to 2% of its GDP from the sale of carbon credits. Huge numbers we're talking about. China obviously supplies around 60% of the CER global market. We talked about this. Again, the transfer of funds and money. So what is applicable in Lebanon? Because a lot of people think about this and say, well, we don't have much infrastructure that we can play with in order to benefit from CDM and the Lebanese economy. Let's talk about the Middle East first, and then we'll talk about Lebanon. The Middle East has a very energy-intensive and carbon-intensive infrastructure. And you look at the GCC, and most of their economies is oil and gas. And again, to put things in perspective, we as Ecosecurities worked on the Qatar Petroleum Al Shaheen project. This is one project in Qatar. And it had the potential to reduce 2.5 million CERs per annum over a 10-year period. That is actually bigger than an entire country in Southeast Asia. So the resources that we're sitting on, if we manage to develop it properly, could bring in enormous FDI into our economies, enormous development of clean energy and energy efficiency. So what we're saying is, it's a shame that the Arab states have not benefited from it. I'm only talking about the GCC and the Levant area, I'm not including North Africa, because we only have 2 projects registered with the United Nations as of today. One is in Jordan and one is in Qatar. These are the only 2 projects that have been registered, as opposed to the thousands of projects worldwide. And it's not about the number as much as it is about the volume of CERs, the potential on an annual basis, and that affects the money terms to the local economy. Now to Lebanon. What we have in Lebanon is, yes, we're a small economy, but we do have potential. Today, we all hear about gas coming into Lebanon. Great stuff. Why doesn't the government move to be more aggressive into putting and labeling these projects under CDM? If they've done that 2 to 3 years ago, we would have a much better additionality argument as opposed to right now. Again, this is a bit of technical issues, but these are why I think the Middle East is lagging behind, because we tend to deal with crises when they happen, not think in advance. So fuel switch has the potential to generate a lot. The project we're working on in Jordan can generate around 600,000 CDRs per annum. So you guys understand that's around $6 million of extra income to one power station in one country. Energy efficiency in industrial application, renewable energy, again, we have potential for possibly wind. But more importantly, it's a landfill gas capture. Today we do have landfills. Some of them are well capped and gas is being burned. Instead of, again, labeling them and structuring them under CDM so we can benefit from them, nothing is being implemented. And again, I'm saying this not to be argumentative as much as to say, well, we do have the opportunity and we can actually get money from them. Back to the big picture. So the way it works, we talked about how money and commodities can be moved from Lebanon to England or the Netherlands in that picture. How does it work? These are the developed economies. You have Japan, Russia, the Europeans, the Canadians, and the Americans. And where they are, and obviously the Australians, but where they are is the Japanese have little room to play with. They need to go out to the international market and buy. The Russians are not in such a terrible shape because their economies collapsed during the Soviet Union or after the Soviet Union. So now they have a little bit more room to play with, so they don't need to go out to the international and buy credits. Europeans, they trade among themselves. The Canadians have a big Kyoto gap because of the oil sand infrastructure they have in the north. It's very energy and carbon intensive. They need to go to the international market and buy lots and lots of credits. And the Americans, because they have not ratified the Kyoto Protocol, they're sort of local initiatives where it's primarily done on a voluntary basis. And CCX, the Chicago Climate Exchange, is one of the successful ones they have, and it's actually been also growing very rapidly. So back to the CDM projects, this is where countries like Lebanon fall under. We generate these credits, or we implement these renewable energy or energy efficiency or clean technology projects on a voluntary basis, qualify them as CDM, and be able to trade these credits internationally and to governments and companies that need to benefit from them. Back to the numbers that I discussed at the beginning, in 2005, it was just under 10 billion euros. In 2008, we're talking about in excess of 90 billion euros of the size of the commodity being traded. Who's staying in this? The governments. Governments buy and sell from each other. Project developers. If one of you guys graduate, they go out, they develop a new project. You're a major player in the CDM business. Banks and funds. Banks have contributed enormously in this business in the past few years, because they've created funds, they've bought and sold a lot of credits, and they've brokered them. Brokers, aggregators are companies like Ecosecurities that basically buy credits from all over the world. We put them into our own portfolio, and then we sell from our portfolio to governments and multinationals that are in need for these commodities. NGOs and basically the environmental issue. This is what we're talking about. This is why we feel the Middle East, well, we don't feel, we know, that the Middle East is lagging behind. As I said, currently, and this includes North Africa, we're only, 1.2% of the projects in the pipeline. We have not issued a single credit from this pipeline. I'm talking about the GCC and the Levant and Syria. And that's a sad story, because we do have enormous resources, huge opportunities. We don't lack the human resources. All we need is the will to go ahead and say yes and move forward. The voluntary market. Parallel to that, So you've got the compliance buyers. These are governments, companies that need to buy under the Kyoto Protocol. They have to do it because if they don't, they get penalized. But what can companies and individuals in countries like Lebanon do, for example, to play part into making a change in climate change? Obviously, yes, we can be energy efficient. We can, every time we leave the room, switch the lights off, teach our kids how to behave when it comes to using the energy resources. But we can go a little bit more, plant trees like a lot of people do, or companies do, but we can go a step further and get involved in this voluntary market. And what the voluntary market says is you can be socially and environmentally responsible by determining your carbon footprint and be able to offset these emissions from buying VDRs from somewhere on this planet. We'll explain that. So you take an event like this, for example, or a company. A company will determine its carbon footprint. They will hire experts, or if they have internally, they will determine where their carbon emission or their greenhouse gas emissions are coming from. Is it from electricity usage? Is it from using backup generator systems? Is it from the travel of senior management or the transportation of employees? So they calculate that, we call that the carbon footprint. Once the carbon footprint is determined, they know exactly how much and where are these emissions from. Then they come to, again, a company like us, where we would sell them a VER, a voluntary emission, a verified emission reduction, which we have actually generated from a wind project in India or China or Thailand. So by buying these VERs, theoretically, what this company is saying, we're not making any emissions because they've offset them from buying them from a project that actually reduced emissions somewhere on this planet. Let's also remember that climate change is a global problem. And a lot of people say, why do I need to contribute to China? Well, because if China pollutes, you're in the same boat with China. So it's not like you have an option. It's a global problem that needs a global partnership. So in the voluntary market, a company can come and say, well, as phase one, I only want to offset my electricity usage. Or I want to, so they determine their own boundaries, in other words, or I want to offset my car or my flights or what have you. That's the beauty of this voluntary market. As companies or individuals can basically say, I want to do this part in the first year, I will increase my scope in the second and the third year. You can do the same thing. A lot of airlines are giving you the option to offset your own emissions. Virgin Atlantic is one of the, I think, leaders into this. If you fly from, I don't know if they fly from Beirut, or if you fly from Dubai to London, the very first thing that comes on your screen is, do you want to offset your trip to London? And if you say yes, you pay an extra, I don't know, 40, 50 bucks. And then you have made, as an individual, your trip to London carbon free. And obviously Virgin goes out and buys them from the local market to contribute on developing clean energy somewhere on this planet. The voluntary market is a different monster because the buyers of these VERs, the verified emission reductions, are very picky. Today, a company just doesn't buy them for the sake of buying them. They want the story behind them. It's a marketing thing. It's a way to promote and educate people. So buyers are they're very specific on the VER, the source of VER, the social, environmental, and sustainable development impact that these VERs have contributed. Let me give you an example. I think it was Yahoo that basically insisted that these VERs be from a specific region on this planet with very specific impact on the social, environmental, sustainable development impact that they have done. So they can be we are working with a customer that specifically wants VERs to be generated from a French speaking company, a Francophone country. So this is where, again, this is how they position themselves, and they can, with educating the customer or the supply chain for that matter, they want to also have a story to tell, and not just make it as a a requirement that people are going to discuss. So let's act. In Lebanon, thanks again to the British Embassy in Beirut that have sponsored these series of workshops. We did several workshops for the private sector, for the public sector, and one specifically for the tourism, banking, and insurance sector. All of those were done last week. This week, 2 weeks ago. This week we're doing the ones with the universities. Today we're doing the AUB. We've done 3 others, and tomorrow we're doing the LAU. Thanks again to the British Embassy, because without their support, it's very important. For people who understand this, that's great. But for people that don't understand this, it's very important that we bring in the message on a very, very general term, so you can basically learn from it on an individual basis, or if you work for the companies you work for. In Lebanon, we're very proud to say that 2 companies have already become carbon neutral, or at least in the process. They've already signed contracts, but they're very aggressively moving towards becoming the leaders. One is Rimco, Rassam Yunus, the authorized dealers for Nissan and
JMC.
No, Hyundai is their cousin. Typical of that. And so Rimco is again is becoming a carbon neutral company. They're purely doing it for marketing purposes. They believe in it. They're doing it for a CSR purpose. And we have another smaller company, actually exponentially growing both regionally and in Europe. It's Abboud uniforms that make uniforms that also are doing it not for marketing purposes. They're not doing it for CSR as much as they are doing it for a way to get into Europe. The way these guys decided to go carbon neutral, and there's nothing wrong with that at all, is when they submitted the tender to a project in London, they were asked what their CSR policies are specifically to the environment. Well, they planted 3 trees in front of the entrance, but that's about everything they've done. They've done serious energy efficiency measures, but again, they had to go carbon neutral. To them, it was a way of being responsible, but more importantly, expanding their business to Europe and be able to gain business. That's exactly what all the multinationals are doing, whether it's marketing CSR or actually differentiating themselves and getting access to more clients and more business. So we wanted to keep this very short, and this is me. Let's have a Q&A session.
Thank you very much, Souheil. So nice to discuss about what's happening out there. I would appreciate anybody who wants to ask a question. First of all, can we have the mobiles off, at least on silent? And then anybody who has a question, please stand up, identify yourself, and shoot up with a question. Any questions from the audience, please?
Hello, Elias Hatta from AUB. Just a couple of questions. First, if I buy a Nissan, I will be carbon free. Second, with 1 ton of carbon emitted in the atmosphere over the latitude of Lebanon will have the same impact on the global climate as 1 ton of carbon emitted in the northern latitudes? Thank you.
Yeah. For Rimco, no, they are not doing what Land Rover did. Land Rover came up with an interesting model where if you buy, and that's globally everywhere, they've launched their Middle East initiative, I think a couple of months ago, where if you buy a Land Rover, the first 72,000 kilometers, the company, Land Rover, will go to the market, buy VERs to offset your first 72,000 kilometer drive. So basically, in theory, what you're doing is you're driving your Land Rover for the first 72,000 emission-free, if you want, because somebody else is buying VERs on your behalf. Rimco is not doing that, because Rimco, they don't manufacture cars. Rimco is a distributor. So what these guys are saying, we want to make our showrooms, and we want to make our maintenance facilities carbon neutral as a phase 1, because to them, quite honestly, it's a learning experience to them. This is very new in the region, so it's a good way for them to learn. Let's become carbon neutral as an operation before we expand it, whether to the logistics that we have, to the supply chain, or to the customers. It might come, I can't talk on their behalf, but it's something that they're thinking of. So for now, if you buy a Nissan, you're basically buying a typical car, right? But at least you know the showroom is carbon neutral. You know, it's again their CSR policy. With respect to you know whether emissions in Lebanon are as damaging to the environment or to the climate as emissions from China, I'm not the scientist, but the answer is yes, because at the end of the day, emissions are they go up to the atmosphere, and you know. One CO2 in Lebanon is as damaging as one CO2 in Canada, for example.
Rami Harfouch, I work in the environmental sector in Lebanon. You mentioned the example of the gas coming to Lebanon, and we know that it's in the interest of Lebanon economically, financially, to bring gas and use it for electricity. Then why would they generate credits from this and then money for projects that would have happened anyway? Also, there were many stories about projects in China that generated lots of credits, mainly from HCFC, with minor investments and for projects that were going to happen anyway. So, do you believe personally that the system is enough regulated to stay honest and to create measurable reductions?
To talk about the Lebanese example first. The Lebanese example is, do I think they should get credits? Yes, I think so. Why? You know, this is the economy. At the end of the day, if we're not going to give countries like Lebanon, emerging economies, the incentive to go ahead and do something, we will never do it. Yes, you're right. Gas makes a lot more sense. It's cleaner. It's possibly cheaper. But again, I go back to what I said halfway through my presentation. A decision to have made these projects CDM qualified should have been made 2 to 3 years ago to avoid people, you know, questions like that raising concerns. It's very important that government companies, you know, under the Kyoto Protocol, there's something called additionality. Additionality is very specific on the question because, you know, some of these projects, do they really need the credits? Do they really need that extra financial incentive to go ahead and do this project if they're going to do them anyway? All of that falls under what's known as additionality, and this is what we advise governments and companies to take into consideration at a very, very early stage. I'll stop here with your answer because I would still like to see the Lebanese economy getting more funds to promote cleaner energy and improving our environment, whether it's through subsidies or CDM. We will work with the government to basically get them CDM approved. With respect to the other projects in China, at the end of the day, the Kyoto Protocol is very well regulated. I think my perspective on it is we're only scratching the surface. It's a very good start. Before 97, we didn't have anything related to combating climate change, or specifically the greenhouse gases. So yes, Kyoto probably isn't the most perfect system. Nothing is perfect, but it's a very good start. So it's a very good start to get a global structure moving forward. I'm not going to comment on the Chinese projects, but all I'm going to say is they've gone through the process. They've gone through the additionality arguments. The United Nations have approved them, and they're generating CDR.
So I just want to add one thing. As Souheil was saying, I mean, the Kyoto Protocol, at the end of the day, it's a human setup system, and we all know there is no perfect system. There might be a couple of things that people are picking on, but in the earlier slide, I just want to show the number of projects in the system. There are something like 4,500 projects in the system. Okay, maybe in the media they talk about 1 or 2 that slips through the little hole of the system, but there are another 4,500 that the media does not talk about. So really, maybe 1 or 2 projects can be problematic, but then there are others that are lowering the emission. And the Chinese project, at the end of the day, is lowering the emission. Now, should it be under Kyoto or not, but it's lowering the emission. And I would like just to answer your question. I mean, at the end of, I'm an engineer, and I have a PhD in engineering, and Souheil knows I read a lot, and I talk science in the office. The scientific community does not know yet the extent of CO2 emission or the impact of CO2 emission in the atmosphere. We have heard that the Japanese have launched a satellite to study the concentration of CO2 emission in the atmosphere and to see really where is the concentration that is most impacting our atmosphere. And maybe you heard also that the American tried to launch a satellite but it crashed. So now we have only one satellite. NASA is doing a lot of research on this. Every year they do something like 280 flights all over the world, and they take specimens to study the effect of CO2 concentration. So we are still learning about this. There was a big debate, if you remember earlier, is it a climate change or a global warming? And some people were saying this is not a global warming, this is maybe something about the ice might go into, the earth might go into an ice age at some point. So the scientific community is still debating this, but everyone agrees it's a climate change. There is a problem, we need to face it. So now the academics are doing their business, they are doing research development, they are trying to understand the problem. The business sector, the governments are doing also their part.
For mitigation, especially that if you look at some of the examples, let's say you're doing a project where for energy efficiency, you're doing it anyway, and you're selling the credit to someone who's going to produce more. So I think what I want to know is that has there been any global assessment being done for assessing mitigation or city as an indication?
Well, let me answer your question in a different way. When you are selling credits to a developed economy entity, you're not telling them to go and pollute more. What you're telling them, or what the Kyoto Protocol is telling them, is you have to reduce your emissions, and if you can't reduce your emissions internally, you can go to the international market and buy them. This doesn't mean that they can pollute more. It means that they have to meet their targets, and if they can't meet their targets, they go to the international market, because at the end of the day, if they don't meet their targets, it's going to cost them a lot more money. So they can pollute more, but it's going to cost them money. And at some point, there's going to be a break-even point. Question on mitigation or adaptation, that's a big discussion. I think we can talk for 2 hours about whether we're doing this as a mitigation or as an adaptation. I think it's a has there been a global study? I don't know. Do you know any global study that has been done?
No, but some projects or some steps or some countries would not have gone through lowering their carbon emission if they did not have the incentive of this extra money coming in. I mean, now there is a lot of discussion for post-Kyoto, and maybe everyone is hearing about it, is some countries are asking for more money to do more steps, and they are saying if there's no money, we don't do anything. So yes, maybe some project would have happened without the money, but other countries would not have done the steps if there was no incentive. So here it is. I mean, Europe is lowering its emission. Now, is it 5%, 2%, 3% every year? But the emissions are being lowered, and the other thing I wanted also to say is, as Souheil was saying, I mean, in Europe they cannot buy as much as they want, especially the European. They have only a limit on how much they can buy. So if they have, for example, a target to lower their emission by 5%, they can only buy 0.5% or something. So they have to do a lot internally to lower the other 4.5. But again, technologically or within the current tools that we have, sometimes some countries cannot meet their targets. So let them help the developing country. Why not?
Actually, but my question is about the mitigation part. I mean, you're doing a presentation about ecosecurity in this business. Has there been an internal study or a study that you're aware of where this has been? Because I see this as a complex situation. I see some positive, some negative. And it's interesting to see if there's any study on this done where it shows if there's a negative or positive overall global. Has this been done in your company?
Not in my company, no. I'm not aware of it. Maybe we have, but I'm not aware of it.
Hi, this is Akhilesh with the Democracy Citizen. I have a question about the company Ecosecurities. Do you develop sustainable development project entered in developed information, or do you simply buy the credits?
What we do is this. We're not a development company per se. The standard definition of project development is if when you graduate, you go up, you develop a wind project, you're a developer. What you do is you engage a company like Ecosecurities to be able to certify these credits on your behalf with the United Nations, work with third-party entities approved by the United Nations, at the end of the day issue these credits on your behalf and be able to buy them so we can trade them internationally. Okay, we are CDM development companies and traders. That's exactly what we are. Because a project developer like yourself, or even if you were a large company, you wouldn't have the resources to go through the process of getting these CERs, the documentation prepared, get the approval from the Lebanese DNA, get third-party entities to audit them, get them registered with the United Nations, get them issued. It's a very lengthy process, takes around 2 years. It costs a lot of money, and it requires a lot of expertise. And today, 60% of Ecosecurities workforce is in the business of actually developing documentation and getting more projects through the process. Imagine if you're a small developer, you would lack all that experience. That's where Ecosecurities plays a major part.
Not to say anything there. How can our company be registered having CRs? And if we are registering a dealer, is it necessary to do it also?
No, it's not necessary. Remember, Solidaire is a Lebanese company. Lebanon has ratified the Kyoto Protocol, but its commitments are zero. If we do anything, we do it voluntary basis. إذا بدنا نوطي emissions في يطلعنا credits. إذا ما بدنا ما يطلعنا شيء. So that's the point. Is you as a Lebanese entity or as a Lebanese government, you've signed, you've ratified the Kyoto Protocol on the basis that's purely done on a voluntary basis. So how can Solidaire get CERs? Well, you have to do a project to get CERs. Today, Solidaire is in the business of real estate. What is it that Solidaire can do to reduce emissions substantially, to make, to qualify and be able to quantify it in a way where it's financially viable, to engage companies like us? It depends. In the real estate business, to be honest with you, I'm not aware. I understand. In the development, that's what I meant, sorry. Development of real estate, right? So, in the development, construction, the tricky point, and I'm answering your question now, is, and Rabi's point, is the Kyoto Protocol is not perfect. Today, before moving and setting up the Middle East operation, I was based in Saudi. I set up the Southeast Asia operation for, the Farajalla Southeast Asia operation for Ecosecurities. We have gone through projects where an environmental disaster, but we couldn't get them through the system because they did not have an approved United Nations methodology. Philippines is filled with pig farms that all the manure is going into the rivers, causing major disasters, but you can't get them certified and you can't improve them because there's no approved methodology. Again, we're not saying Kyoto is perfect. It's definitely far from being perfect. It's a good start. It's scratching the surface. This, again, I think answers your question, again, answers your question is, maybe in the construction business there are ways to reduce emissions, but if they're difficult to monitor, if there's no approved UN methodology for them, there's nothing you can do. How can Solidaire play part? Well, Solidaire can play part in the second voluntary market we talked about by being a carbon neutral company, by raising awareness in Lebanon, and today Solidaire is a very high-profile company. People listen when you guys have press releases or when you do something. So it's a good way for Solidaire to basically promote carbon neutrality within the operation, but more importantly, communicated internally as well as externally.
Is there a value for the carbon?
Of course.
Money value.
Right?
What is
It's a market. It used to be 20.
Chicago.
No, Chicago. CCX is the voluntary market. CCX. The EU prices are completely different. So you don't mix the CERs with the VERs. VERs It's supply and demand. It's what the buyer is willing to pay for it. It is an unregulated market. The CER business is a regulated market. It's a fluctuating commodity. Yani 2 years ago, or less than 2 years ago, it was around 27 euros. Today, what is it? 11, 12 euros. So it's a commodity. Per CER. One CER is 1 ton of carbon dioxide. So,
where do you see the price of carbon in the midst of this financial crisis that we are facing now?
And if I knew I'd be a millionaire, I wouldn't be here. Let's look at the fundamentals. Let's look at the fundamentals. Today, the global economy is going into a recession. Okay, how does it impact emissions? Well, the biggest buyers, for example, of emission reductions in Europe, for example, because of the slowdown in the economy, they're actually not buying as much, right? So it's again supply demand. The price drops. So if the European utilities are not buying, the price of this commodity will decrease, unless there's a V-turn shape in the global economy. The economy picks up as quickly as previous recessions. Nobody's expecting that, but then we will see a sharp rebound of the price of CPIs. If it continues, if we're going to have a long recession, if 2009 is going to continue to be very weak, and drags to 2010, we would expect that the prices will continue to be low.
So I have a question follow up on Dr. Mehmet. A ton of carbon produced in Europe, I'm talking about currency here. Is it equivalent to a ton of carbon produced in the Philippines? How do you equate those? There's the fundamental difference in the currency that we're talking about.
Okay. If you're talking about a ton of carbon, it's the same. If you are talking about a commodity with a different carbon trading scheme, it's different. The European, when Souheil showed that they have a European emission trading, they have a market between themselves. And what they do is, the government, let's say a company in France and a company in England. The company in France is given a quota per year, and the company in England is given a quota per year, or even within the same company. If one of these companies is below its quota, it can sell the remaining. And this is a commodity, it has its price. Okay? Now, the others that come under CDM, it's a CER, it has one price, let it be generated in Latin America or let it be generated in Southeast Asia.
Dollar value.
It's a different commodity. No.
Okay. I mean, I'm looking at the equitability of the CER. The CER is the same.
The CER nothing
No, that's what I know, but is it the dollar, let's say 1 unit in Northern Europe, is it equal to 1 unit in CDM country? In dollar value?
It's two different.
No, I'm at the equitability of
Okay, it's two different commodities. It's two different commodities, they have different prices. Okay? But the one generated from Europe are quotas given by the government.
True, I understand that, but
to answer your question, no.
So the Europeans have they buy at a lower rate if you want from CDM, but from CDM countries, right?
That's what you're saying.
And if they do it amongst themselves, they buy at a more expensive rate. So somebody gets the short end of the stick here, right?
They cannot get, again, they have a limit of how many they can get from CDM.
Right, but
20%. What he's saying, the 20% that the Europeans are buying actually are cheaper than buying them from among them. Yes, the answer is yes.
Cheaper. I mean, it's supply demand.
No, it's North Stars.
Maybe.
Suppose I have a project and we put some renewable energy farms, some solar cells and so on, and then I want to find the value of carbon trading. So can I look at the European exchange price and then roughly this is the price? Or?
No, you can't. You can, give you an idea, but is this the price you're going to get? No. Why? Because your project, if your project is still in an idea phase, we think like banks to a certain extent. Today, when you come to us with an idea, the risk associated with you as a person, the risk associated with your business, with the financial needs that you have, are very different from, say, Souheil coming to us and saying, we want to develop something. So, killa, risk mitigation, risk analysis. The country Lebanon is a high-risk market. It's a fact, whether we like it or not. There's also a certain aspect to that. Birja, which is more important, if your credits are issued, they have a value to us, because today I am in great need for credits to go ahead and make money immediately, as opposed to working with you for a couple of years and hope for the best that the UN is going to approve them. You're not going to go out of business. You're not going to get bored and leave the project. Million other risks. So the idea here is you can go on the net and see what the price is. I'll give you an idea. It's definitely not the price you're going to get.
Excuse me, the prices are fixed by the market.
No, that's not true. The prices are fixed. A lot of the projects are signed, bought and sold on bilateral basis. Today, when you come to me, it's a negotiation between you and me. It could be way lower than the market if I don't have faith in or have lots of risks associated with your operation.
So basically, you are the clearinghouse.
No, we're developing. Bilateral agreements are one thing, and today for me to develop your project and get it through the system is another thing. So I'm taking all the financial risk. You're not paying me a penny. So I'm taking all the financial risk. I'm taking all the financial risk. I'm taking all the approval risk. The DNA in Lebanon might say, we're not going to give you a letter of approval. I've lost everything. We take all the risk. We develop it.
So we can come to you with an idea, and you take all
the ideas. We're not considering them. We need it. Even theoretically, we're not considering them. I'm just kidding. Kyoto ends in 2012. I'm not being. So to come up with an idea, by the time you materialize this idea, I get it through the UN system. Also not 2012. So therefore, unless it's a serious project, that we see a lot of one project in the Middle East could be huge, right? So, as I said, we have 2 projects in the Middle East. The only 2 projects in the Middle East are done by us. And I'm telling you, one project in Qatar could be as big as a whole country in Southeast Asia. So yes, we can do 2 projects that would be extremely well done. What ends in because that's the agreement. Kyoto ends in 2012. This is why every year the $1 million question. The alternative is
sorry, Kyoto doesn't end in when first period we're entering by status quo. So there must be post Kyoto, should be Kyoto 2 or Copenhagen.
That's what I'm talking about. In every year, the COP, the Conference of the Parties, they meet, and basically next year everybody has high hopes that in Copenhagen there will be a post-Kyoto agreement, that something will replace Kyoto, phase 2 Kyoto, or whatever. At this point, what it is, nobody knows. And if anybody says you, they tell you they know, they don't know, quite honestly. Yes, there's a general consensus that the trading of commodities, of environmental commodities, will continue post-2012. We are making commitments to buy up to 2017. How, under which infrastructure, and how is it going to work, we don't know. And you will see this reflected in the contracts where specifically it says based on, contingent on, if, but.
Because a certain project is accredited under the Kyoto. If we have another thing in 2012, we got to have to go through the process once again, or
I hope not. No, we hope not. No, we hope not. Again, I think.
Sorry, we've got Dr. Haj.
Hasn't Haj. So I have a couple of questions, maybe not on the carbon mitigation and exchange, but question one actually for Lebanon, and this climate change, global warming, do we understand what Lebanon and the region could be facing? I mean, I hear a lot about, you talk about New Orleans, we know about Iceland, what's going on. But do we, I mean, here maybe students or faculty or whatever other resources, do we know what Lebanon or the region could be facing? Is that information available? That's question one. Question two, at the scientific level, maybe, what are the challenges, again, for the region that we all figure out, actually, in this climate change global, that, we feel the region is facing and maybe no one's looking at, and Lebanon is looking at. I'm not sure if you have the answers or someone else.
That's a whole set of presentations right in of themselves here. There's a whole bunch of
algorithms. I mean, funnily enough, when I'm in Saudi or when I'm in Qatar and there is a presentation about the effect of climate change on this specific country presented by a national of this country, they always use data and the research done outside the Middle East and done in the US or in Europe or somewhere else. So the Western world, or if you want the North, is telling the South what will happen to them. Coming back to Lebanon, now I know Lebanon is preparing its second national communication to the UNFCCC, and this should include some chapters on what are the impact on Lebanon and what Lebanon should be doing. Lebanon did its first communication, now it's doing its second. So I know maybe AUB is trying to take part, USG is trying to take part, so maybe something will come up.
كان عندي جواب اصلا شو جمعيات السكي قدام بقول له انتم كنتوا تعملوا سكي من نوفمبر اكتوبر نوفمبر ابريل هلا السكي سيزون is a lot shorter. يعني think about it, this is it's a funny way of putting it, بس اليوم اذا بتعمل سكي شهرين فحل انت. It's all whether you believe or not, it's all part of climate change.
We can talk about this a little bit later if you want. Because it's yes, but we have the lady here and the gentleman, if you don't mind.
I'm from India. I just wanted to answer the previous question on protocols. Kyoto, when it was signed, it took about two years, let's say, to get ratification in the countries and then to get implemented. They have a lag period before it actually goes into effect. The same will happen post-Copenhagen. Copenhagen is in December. Assuming that everyone does agree on something and everyone does sign a treaty, you have a few years before everyone ratifies it and then before they start implementing it. So this is, I think, why you have the lag of both the post-Kyoto. You're taking projects in 2017. I think this is one of the reasons.
I mean, obviously, what we're saying is we're trying to simplify it. We're not saying if they agree in December of 2009, that's it. No, it's exactly what you're saying, and politics plays a major role in this, and governments pulling and pushing.
I have two questions. First, do you have a ballpark figure on the potential carbon trading development project? And did you do a rapid assessment of the market and what could be done? And the second, let's say we have two landfills or dump sites in Lebanon, in the north and in Bush Hamoud. Since they have been burning the methane, do they qualify for carbon farming or is it too late? I'm just talking about these two. Okay, now.
Yeah.
You have exactly as well.
Exactly. If they're burning, if they're already flaring the gas, the additionality argument is very difficult. We have been working with the Lebanese government for quite some time. We've been lobbying with them to take additionality very seriously. We started with our partners here in Lebanon, Stable Environmental Solution, almost 2.5 years ago. Anything happened? No. Now, if the government comes to us and say, yes, we're interested, we feel it's going to be a very difficult argument. We're willing to take it, but it's a difficult argument. What is the potential in Lebanon? It depends. If you include the cement companies, it's a very difficult answer. If you want me to throw numbers, 1 million CERs a year. Is it realistic? I don't know. Why? Because it depends. The major source of emissions are the power stations, landfills, and the cement companies. and it depends on what you can do and what sort of projects do you do that are economically feasible. It could be as little as 100,000 to possibly a million and a half, but we're throwing numbers in the air.
For landfills, what might help the difficult argument that Souheil mentioned is moving maybe from flaring the gas to generating heat or electricity out of it. This might help a bit, but who knows?
Sorry, I'm going to add one. Did you look at all the treatment plants that are being built or have been built in Lebanon? Could we do something about them in terms
What
of
treatment?
Yeah.
Which treatment?
Yeah.
In theory. What treatment? No, in Greenfield, back to Kyoto, Greenfield, in certain applications, they don't. We don't have approved methodologies for them. They have to be very specific on the project and whether it has an approved methodology. It is not worth developing a new methodology because, again, Kyoto ends in 2012. When I use the word end. Phase one. Phase one.
This is the first period.
It's not. Time is not on our side. Therefore, we have contributed to, I think, 30% of the approved methodologies now have Ecosecurities. Now, unless we're dealing with a extremely attractive, sexy project, we're not going into this.
Who's doing the certification here? What's the process? Who's the regulator?
The regulator is the executive board in the United Nations. Think of them as auditors. These are companies like SGS, like DNV. They basically control, they monitor, and they check all the work that a project developer does and says, and the work, the documentation that we get approved and we develop. All of this is taken to the executive board in the United Nations and gets approved by the UN. So it's a very, very regulated market, and it's not left to the private industry to do it.
I have a couple of questions. Issue. Transport sector, taking that and converting that carbon credit emissions from the transport sector terrestrial, not necessarily just and in Lebanon, for example, the generators, the private power generators, that would be another. And would then, if the government regulates that and improves on the emissions of those, would the government get the money?
It's a beautiful theoretical question. ليش؟ لأن اليوم it's very the only way you get credits is when you monitor the emissions. يعني you can do a wind farm, it's up and running, it's beautiful, but if there's no wind, you're not going to get anything. Right. You only get credits for the amount of clean kilowatt hours you generate, for example.
Excuse me, as compared to what?
As compared to what the infrastructure of the country is. So if your plant is in Lebanon, the infrastructure in Lebanon is a combination of heavy fuel oil, diesel, and hydrogen. Every country has a emission factor that we have to use that's been also approved and by the DOE, designated operating entity. So in comparison to that.
So it's really complicated.
Of course. So back to your question. So the monitoring of the transportation, and if you have to say, okay, we have out of the 1.5 million cars in Lebanon, 900,000 of them are extremely polluting because they're old. How do you monitor them?
Mechanic
Sensors.
Theoretically, they're great. Remove them is the perfect answer, actually. Bicycles would be great. So what we're saying is, from a monitoring perspective, the UN tells you it's a nightmare. Imagine, but think of it on a global scale. So therefore, you still don't have an approved methodologies for specifically the transportation industry, right? Likewise, generators اللي عندنا مابعين بكل شارع. إنه اليوم you can do something which is called programmatic CDM, Programmatic CDM takes a population مثل ما هي بيقول لك if it's very difficult to monitor and if it's sample من رجعت statistics أنا كنت جحش بالstatistics مش أنا أتفهم فيها. They take a population من هالsample وبيجي بيقول لك that's if we monitor this it applies to the environment. بس اليوم كمان programmatic CDM does not pick up ما عندك projects in Abboud. So therefore again we're back and the cost associated with monitoring sensors على السيارات ولا is very high. يعني اليوم if it doesn't make financial sense شو بدنا نعمل؟
But the question here is when you're talking about the transport sector, especially in Lebanon, that's the major source of pollution, air pollution in Lebanon.
I'm not disagreeing with you.
And especially you the add-on to it is, you were talking about add-ons, is the generator. So if there is a scheme to control emissions or test emissions, technically in any major countries, when you go to do your sticker in the US or here the Mechanism, they should be able to test emissions on your vehicle. So vehicular emissions are tested annually, and that could be a control check. And then the generators is another issue, but it's not that difficult to regulate.
Wait, I'm with you. But اليوم it's a law that you have to have your car under certain level limit of emissions. Remember, Kyoto is about something going out of your business as usual. So if there's a law that your car shouldn't be polluting more than X% or whatever the value is, the fact that you're going from an old beat-up car to fix it to that level, which is a law anyway, you don't get anything for it because this car shouldn't be on the street in the first place. So
okay, we can
argue that is very important point.
It's not an enforced law. So once you move into an enforced law, it's just and then it is.
But the fact it's a law, usually in the United Nations, it's a law. Therefore, I can't say it. Whether it's enforced or not, that becomes out of the question. If you go beyond what the law says, maybe we're talking programmatic CDM. But again, the price of monitoring is going to be very, very different.
Any further questions for our friends? Excellent. With that, thank you very much.